She was 32 years old, 5'4", and wearing a pair of scrub pants with a coffee stain on the left knee. She had no weapon, no badge, no title that meant anything to the man standing in front of her. She had only her hands, her training, and the kind of certainty that doesn't come from a classroom. Lieutenant Dorian Voss had a gun, a badge, and 20 years of people stepping out of his way. He used all three like a hammer. When she told him the man in handcuffs was bleeding inside his abdomen, Voss laughed. When she stepped forward anyway, he shoved her, hard enough that she hit the supply cart and knocked it sideways, in front of 40 people in the emergency department of Harlow General Hospital. 12 minutes later, his prisoner crashed. What Dorian Voss didn't know, what almost no one in that building knew, was that the woman he had just shoved across a hallway had once walked into a burning medical station under active enemy fire to pull 3 soldiers out alive. She hadn't told anyone. She hadn't needed to. Before you go any further, if this kind of story keeps you watching until the end, follow this channel right now, hit that like button, and drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. Harlow General was not a glamorous hospital. It sat in the northeastern edge of Calverton, a mid-sized city built on old manufacturing money and a stubborn refusal to acknowledge that the factories had been closed for 30 years. The emergency department on any given Tuesday night looked like a controlled argument. Nurses moving fast between curtains, doctors talking over each other at the medication station, the overhead lights casting everything in a yellow that made healthy people look sick and sick people look worse. Maya Okafor had worked there for 11 months. She had transferred from St. Albans Medical Center in another state with clean paperwork, solid references, and almost no personal detail that anyone could pin down. Her supervisor, charge nurse Patricia Humes, had interviewed her twice before offering the position, and even after both conversations, she came away with the impression that Maya had answered every question thoroughly while somehow revealing almost nothing. Patricia had mentioned this to her colleague once. She's good, but there's something closed about her. And then they'd both moved on because the department was short 3 nurses, and Maya Okafor could start a peripheral IV in a moving elevator. She was quiet in the way that isn't shyness, the kind of quiet that comes from having spent years in environments where unnecessary noise could get people killed. She said good morning, she said please, she documented everything twice, and she had an almost unnerving habit of arriving at a patient's bedside approximately 40 seconds before the monitors showed any reason to be there. The ER staff liked her. Not in the warm, joke-swapping way that develops over years. Maya didn't share much about herself, and she didn't ask much either, but in the way that competent people earn respect without campaigning for it. When Dr. Elliot Marsh, the senior attending on night shift, needed someone to manage a trauma bay while he handled a simultaneous code, he called Maya without thinking about it. When the overnight pharmacist had a question about a dosage interaction, Maya answered before he could finish the sentence. She wasn't showing off. She genuinely did not seem to notice she was doing anything unusual. The friction with the Calverton Police Department had been building since her 3rd week on the job. It started small. A patient brought in under arrest needed wound irrigation, and the officer standing guard refused to uncuff him long enough for Maya to position his arm correctly. She asked twice, calmly, explained the clinical reason, and when the officer still refused, she went over his head to the department supervisor without raising her voice. The cuffs came off. The officer didn't speak to her again, but he told people about it, and word travels fast in a city where the hospital and the precinct have a decades-long working relationship that mostly means the cops expect deference and the nurses learn to give it. By her 2nd month, she had filed 2 formal complaints, one regarding an officer who had physically blocked her from reaching a patient, one regarding documentation she'd witnessed being altered in a way that changed a suspect's account of their own injuries. Both complaints were acknowledged. Neither produced a visible result. That was when Dorian Voss started paying attention to her. Voss ran the department's fugitive apprehension unit, which meant he spent most of his time either chasing people or reminding everyone else that he chased people. He was 51, broad through the shoulders, and had the physical confidence of a man who had never lost a fight he'd chosen to start. He wore his badge clipped to his belt like it was load-bearing. His unit had a clear-up rate that the department publicized every year, and Voss made sure he was in every photograph. He was also, in Maya's clinical assessment, the kind of man who understood authority as a one-way door. They met properly on a Wednesday evening when his unit brought in a suspect named Troy Belkin, 20s, apprehended after a foot chase, contusions on both arms, and a laceration above his left eyebrow that needed suturing. Standard presentation. The officer escorting Belkin handed him off at triage, and Maya took him into Bay 4. Voss followed them in without being asked. "I need him processed fast," Voss said. He wasn't speaking to Maya. He was speaking to the general air in the direction of anyone who might be useful. "He'll be assessed first," Maya said. She was already checking Belkin's pupils. Voss looked at her like she'd said something in a foreign language. "I wasn't asking." "He has right orbital swelling and he was unconscious briefly after the chase, per your officer's notes. That's a concussion protocol, regardless of his legal status." "He was faking." Maya didn't look up. "I'll determine that." Voss stood there for a moment with the expression of a man trying to decide if this was worth his energy. He decided it was. He spoke to her for 6 more minutes in the way that men like Voss speak to people they've decided don't count. Not shouting exactly, but with a particular texture of contempt that doesn't require volume. Maya responded to the clinically relevant parts and did not respond to the rest. When she called radiology for a head CT, Voss told her she was wasting everyone's time. When radiology confirmed a small subdural hematoma, Voss was no longer in the room. She didn't file a complaint about that interaction. She noted his behavior in her own records, the personal ones she kept in a small notebook in her locker, and went on with her shift. Over the following 6 weeks, Voss's unit cycled through the ER 7 more times. Every time, there was friction. A nurse who'd been in the department for 9 years told Maya privately that it hadn't always been like this, that Voss used to be bad but manageable, and that something in the last year had made him worse. Maya listened to this without offering a theory. She continued doing her job. The night everything changed was a Thursday in November. Voss came in at 9:40 p.m. with a prisoner named Gerald Soto, 38, arrested on a warrant out of 2 counties over. Soto had fought during apprehension. There were defensive wounds on his forearms, a split lip, and bruising across his ribs consistent with impact from a fall or a strike. He was ambulatory when they brought him in, cuffed at the wrists, and he was walking in a way that Maya clocked from across the department. She was finishing a note at the nursing station when they came through the doors. She watched Soto take 6 steps and set it aside. The gait was wrong. Not wrong like a man who'd been roughed up. She knew what that looked like. Wrong, like a man whose body was compensating for something his brain didn't fully register yet. A slight forward lean. Weight distributed toward the left side without reason. Left arm held closer to his torso than the right, even accounting for the cuffs. She crossed the department and met them before they reached triage. "I need to assess him before he's processed," she said to the triage nurse, then turned to Soto. "Sir, any pain in your abdomen or left side?" Soto looked at her with the flat exhaustion of a man who had been through several bad hours. "Little bit," he said. "Nothing." "On a scale?" "He's fine," Voss said. He walked in on his own 2 feet. "Walking doesn't rule out internal injury." She addressed Soto directly. "Did you fall during the chase? Land on anything?" Soto glanced at Voss. Whatever he saw there kept him quiet. "I'm going to need to examine him," Maya said. "You're going to need to wait your turn," Voss said. "We've got paperwork. He gets processed, then you can do whatever you do." "Lieutenant, if he has abdominal trauma and there's active bleeding, the window to intervene is not long. And if he doesn't, you've wasted everyone's time." Voss stepped closer. He wasn't touching her, but the movement was designed to make her aware that he could. "We've had this conversation before, haven't we? You're the one who keeps filing reports." "I file reports when there's clinical cause." "You file reports because you like the attention." His voice had gone quieter, which with Voss meant the opposite of calm. "You've been a problem since you got here. I don't know where you came from or what you think this is, but this is my jurisdiction when I'm in this building." "It isn't," Maya said. "This is a hospital." He wasn't expecting her to hold the line. Nobody in the ER held the line with Voss, and most people had stopped trying years ago. The surprise moved across his face fast, replaced immediately by something harder. "Get out of my way," he said. "I can't do that." What happened next happened in front of 41 people, nurses, techs, 2 physicians, a security guard, several patients in waiting room chairs, and 3 of Voss's own officers. He put his hand on her shoulder and shoved her sideways. Not a push past. A shove. She caught the supply cart with her hip, and the metal shelf edge caught her arm, and a tray of supplies went across the floor. The department went quiet the way it only goes quiet when something crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. Maya straightened up. She didn't say anything. She looked at Voss with an expression that several people would later struggle to describe. Not anger, exactly. Something older and more contained than anger. Voss pointed at her. "You're done here. Security." Raymond Pick, the overnight security officer, looked between Voss and Maya and did not move. "Raymond," Voss said, sharper. Dr. Elliot Marsh came out of Bay 2 with his gloves still on. He looked at the scattered supplies, at Maya's arm, at Voss. "Lieutenant, you don't have the authority to—" She was obstructing a law enforcement operation. She was standing in a hallway. "Dr. Marsh," Maya's voice was level. It cut through the rising argument cleanly. "I'd like to complete Mr. Soto's triage." "Of course," Marsh said. "I want her out of this department," Voss said. He was talking to Marsh now, with the particular certainty of a man who believed rank moved sideways across institutions. "Tonight, whatever your process is." Marsh looked at him for a moment. "The process is that nurses are employed by this hospital, not by your unit, and what I just watched is going to be in a report on the administrator's desk before my shift ends. Now I suggest you let us do our jobs." He turned to Maya. "Bay 6 is open." Soto was walking on his own when they brought him into Bay 6, and he sat on the exam table with the posture of a man trying not to acknowledge that something hurt. Maya ran through the assessment methodically. Palpation of the abdomen in the left upper quadrant produced an involuntary flinch that Soto immediately tried to cover. His blood pressure was within normal range, but his heart rate was elevated in a pattern she recognized. The left side guarding was subtle. She'd have missed it if she hadn't been watching for exactly that. "I need a fast ultrasound," she said to the tech behind her, "and get Dr. Marsh." She was explaining the finding to Marsh 6 minutes later when Gerald Soto's blood pressure dropped 20 points in 90 seconds and he lost consciousness. The crash cart was already in the hallway because Maya had put it there while she was waiting for the ultrasound. The next 14 minutes were controlled and fast and loud in the precise, purposeful way of a trauma team that knows what it's doing. The ultrasound confirmed free fluid in the abdomen, a splenic laceration, they'd learn later, from a fall Soto had taken during the chase that had wrenched him against a concrete barrier in a way his body had been quietly compensating for ever since. He went to surgery. He survived. In the hallway outside Bay 6, one of Voss's officers, young, maybe 26, with the look of someone who is reconsidering several life choices simultaneously, said quietly to the charge nurse, "He warned her, before they even came in. He told us Soto said his side hurt, and the lieutenant said it didn't matter." Patricia Humes looked at the officer for a long moment. "Write that down," she said, "with the time." The officer wrote it down. Voss was in the waiting area when Marsh came out of Bay 6. He had his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had decided that whatever had just happened was not his fault. "Your prisoner is in surgery," Marsh said. "Grade 2 splenic laceration. He would have died in a holding cell within 3 or 4 hours if she hadn't caught it." Voss didn't respond immediately. "I've already spoken to hospital administration," Marsh continued, "and to legal, and I've pulled every incident report filed in this department involving your unit in the last 11 months. That's a lot of reports." "It is. Maya filed 8 of them. Every single one was clinically valid, and every single one was either dismissed or shelved." Marsh paused. "That's going to be a different conversation with a different set of people. Tonight, you shoved one of my nurses in front of 40 witnesses. Whatever happens next, that's what tonight was." Voss looked at him with the eyes of a man doing math. "She got in the way. She told you a man was bleeding internally. He was bleeding internally." Marsh pulled his gloves off, one at a time, and dropped them in the waste bin beside the door. "Go home, Lieutenant." Maya was at the nursing station when Patricia Humes came and sat beside her. The department had leveled out, the crisis energy draining away, the normal rhythms of a Thursday night reasserting themselves. Somewhere behind a curtain, a child was crying. A monitor beeped in a steady, reassuring pattern. "You should have your arm looked at," Patricia said. "The edge of that cart." "It's a bruise." "Let someone look at it." Maya pulled up her sleeve. It was technically a bruise, a long red mark along the forearm that would go purple by morning. She looked at it the way a person looks at something that happened to someone slightly removed from them. "I've had worse," she said, and didn't elaborate. Patricia sat with that for a moment. She'd been charge nurse for 16 years. She'd developed a fairly reliable radar for what people meant when they said something like that. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Where did you work before St. Albans?" A pause. Brief, controlled. "A few different places," Maya said. "I moved around a lot." "What kind of places?" Maya turned back to her monitor. "The kind where people needed nurses," she said, and pulled up the next patient file. Patricia didn't push, but she sat there for another minute, looking at the side of Maya's face, and the thing she couldn't quite name settled a little more solidly in the back of her mind. At 11:15 p.m., Maya went on her break. She took her coffee to the small outdoor space behind the staff entrance, a concrete square with 2 plastic chairs and a rusted table that someone had tried to improve with a potted plant, now dead. She sat with the cup in both hands and looked at the dark parking lot and breathed. She was not, in this moment, thinking about Dorian Voss. She was thinking about Gerald Soto's heart rate on the monitor and the specific pattern of it, the way his body had been compensating, spending down a reserve it didn't have, the clock running the whole time he'd been in handcuffs, filling out paperwork in a waiting area. She'd seen that exact pattern before, in environments where there wasn't a crash cart in the hallway, in environments where the closest surgical team was an airlift away, and sometimes the airlift didn't come in time. She drank her coffee. She went back inside. At 12:35 a.m., she was checking the medication counts on the overnight cart when her personal phone buzzed. She looked at it once, looked away, looked back. The number was one she recognized. She hadn't seen it in almost 2 years. She stepped into the supply room and closed the door and answered. "Okafor," she said, her voice dropping into a register that people who only knew her from the ER had never heard. The voice on the other end was male, clipped, and carried the particular timbre of someone who was accustomed to talking in environments where brevity was survival. "You're in Calverton." "I'm in Calverton." "We have a situation. Multiple casualties. Restricted operation. We're coming to you. We don't have a choice on location." She was already doing the math. "What's the timeline?" 25 minutes. "How many?" A pause. The kind of pause that means the number isn't good. 7 confirmed. 2 critical. One of them is... Another pause. "It's Reyes." Something moved across her face in the supply room, alone, that no one would ever see. She set it aside the way she had been trained to set things aside. "I'll be ready," she said. "Okafor." The voice held for a moment. "It's good that you're there." She hung up. She stood in the supply room for exactly 4 seconds, and then she opened the door and walked back out to the nursing station with the same unhurried, quiet step she'd had all night. She pulled Patricia Humes aside at the desk. "We need to call the trauma team in early," she said. "Multiple casualties incoming, approximately 20 minutes. Patricia looked at her. "How do you know?" "Call them in," Maya said. It wasn't a request exactly. It wasn't rude. It was just the kind of sentence that didn't leave room for a different outcome. "And we need both trauma bays clear. Anything that can be moved, move it now." Patricia stared at her for one more second and then picked up the phone. Maya walked to the window that faced the hospital's eastern ambulance bay. The parking lot was quiet and dark and ordinary looking. She stood there and watched it and thought about Corporal Daniel Reyes, 26 years old, who had once sat on the ground in a dust-covered village at an elevation of 8,000 feet, telling her she was crazy to stay, and she had told him she had not come this far to leave anyone behind, and he had looked at her with the expression of a man who was going to live because someone had refused to give him permission to die. She hoped that was still true. The first set of headlights appeared at the east end of the parking lot. Not ambulances, not exactly. The vehicles were larger, darker, moving in a configuration that no civilian convoy moved in. They came fast. They came quiet. Behind her, she heard Patricia on the phone, her voice rising. I don't know how she knew. She just told me to call. And heard the overhead system click to life. Heard the words trauma activation. And heard the sounds of a department shifting into a different gear. She turned from the window. She rolled her sleeves up to the elbow, the way she had not rolled them up in almost 2 years. The bruise on her forearm from Voss's shove caught the light, dark red, the shape of the cart edge pressed into her skin. She looked at it for 1 second. Then she walked toward the doors. The first vehicle had stopped at the ambulance bay entrance, and the back was already open, and there were people in tactical gear moving with the controlled urgency of operators who had been trained not to panic, even when panic would be the rational response. And there was blood. There was a significant amount of blood. Maya pushed through the doors, and the cold November air hit her, and she was already reading the scene before she'd taken 3 steps, counting casualties, assessing mobility, calculating who needed her first, and who could wait, and who was already past the window. She stopped in front of the first stretcher. The operator on it was conscious, barely. He had an improvised tourniquet on his right thigh that someone had done correctly, and a pressure bandage on his left shoulder that someone had done less correctly, and there was a significant amount of blood, and he was gray in the face. He turned his head and looked at her. His eyes, which had been flat and shock-distant, sharpened. "Hey," he said. His voice was rough and strange, the voice of someone running low on blood and oxygen. "Hey, I know you." Maya was already assessing the shoulder dressing with both hands. "Don't talk," she said. "No, He coughed, winced. "Ma'am, you're Okafor." Behind her, Dr. Marsh came through the doors at a jog. He stopped short when he saw the scale of what was in the ambulance bay. 7 casualties. The vehicles. The tactical gear. The men who were not paramedics and were not police, and whose weapons were not anything the Calverton PD carried. "Maya," Marsh said, and the use of her first name was itself a kind of question. The operator on the stretcher was still looking at her. He was smiling, which was insane given his current blood pressure, but some people were like that. The relief of a familiar face unlocking something the situation didn't have room for. "We heard you transferred to a hospital," he said. We didn't know which one. Sergeant Tolliver is going to lose his mind when he—" "I said don't talk," Maya said. Her voice was gentle and absolutely immovable. She looked up at Marsh. "Shoulder laceration with possible subclavian involvement. The tourniquet on the leg is good. We keep it until we're in the bay. I need you on the second stretcher. Bilateral lower extremity blast injury. He's the one who needs the OR first." Marsh looked at her. He looked at the operators in tactical gear. He looked at the vehicles. He opened his mouth. "Elliot," she said. Just his name. The way she said it made him close his mouth and move to the second stretcher. From somewhere in the cluster of vehicles, a man in a jacket with no insignia was on a satellite phone, speaking in a low, rapid voice. He looked up and found Maya across the chaos of the ambulance bay, and something in his expression, something between recognition and relief, lasted only a second before he went back to the call. The operator on the first stretcher was being moved now. As the orderlies took the handles, his hand caught Maya's wrist. Just for a second. His grip was weak, much weaker than it should have been. "Reyes," he said. "Is Reyes—" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I'm going to find out." She let go of his hand and turned toward the last vehicle, which hadn't opened yet, and the 2 men standing beside it had the look of people who were bracing for something. She walked toward it. Behind her, the emergency department of Harlow General Hospital was doing what emergency departments do in a crisis, reorganizing around the scale of the problem, personnel moving in patterns that required no instruction, the architecture of the building suddenly restructured by the need pressing against it. Patricia Humes was directing traffic at the doors. Dr. Marsh was talking to his second stretcher patient in the steady, calm voice of a trauma physician who had made his peace with chaos. And at the nursing station, barely visible in the motion of the department, one of Voss's younger officers was standing very still with his notebook out, watching the military vehicles in the ambulance bay, and then watching Maya Okafor walk toward the last vehicle like she owned the ground she moved across, and writing down something he didn't yet fully understand. The back of the last vehicle opened. What was inside made Maya stop walking for exactly 1 step. Then she stepped up into the vehicle and pulled the door partially closed behind her, and what she said in there, no one outside could hear. Daniel Reyes was alive. That was the first thing she established, and she established it in the first 4 seconds inside that vehicle. His chest was moving, his airway was intact, his color was bad, but not the specific bad that meant she was already too late. He had a penetrating wound to the right side of his chest, low enough that it had likely clipped the lower lobe of the lung, and someone had done a chest seal on it that had bought him time without fully understanding what they were buying time for. His eyes were closed. His breathing had the quality of something laboring against resistance. "When did this happen?" she said. Not a question, the way she said it. The man crouching beside Reyes, late 30s, jaw set, the kind of face that had been still under pressure so many times it had learned to default there, looked up at her. 90 minutes ago, we couldn't go to the primary site. They had to reroute." 90 minutes. She did the math without showing it on her face. "He's been on that seal for 90 minutes? "Yes." "Has he been conscious at all?" "In and out. He said your name twice." The man paused. "We didn't know what he meant until we pulled up and saw your badge." Maya put 2 fingers against Reyes's neck and counted. His pulse was there, thin, faster than she wanted, but there. She checked the seal placement, checked the flutter valve, checked his tracheal position with 2 fingers pressed to the base of his throat. "He's developing a tension," she said. "We need to move him now." "Can you?" "I can needle him in the vehicle, but I'd rather have a chest tube tray in front of me." She was already moving toward the door. "He needs 30 seconds of still air and a flat surface. Get him inside." She dropped out of the vehicle, and the cold hit her again, and she was already talking before her feet were on the ground. "Patricia, I need trauma bay 1 cleared completely. Chest tube tray, size 28 French, chest seal kit, a liter of saline running wide open. I need respiratory at the bedside in 3 minutes." Patricia Humes had spent 16 years as a charge nurse, and she had heard a lot of different kinds of urgent in that time. The way Maya said it was not louder than usual. It was something else, a frequency that Patricia's body responded to before her brain caught up. She turned around and started moving. The man from the vehicle, Maya still didn't know his name, hadn't asked, wasn't going to until Reyes was stable, was directing 2 other operators as they moved the stretcher. They handled it with the care of people who knew what they were carrying and what it would mean if they dropped it. Dr. Marsh appeared at her left shoulder. He was breathing a little fast, which for Marsh meant the situation had registered. "Talk to me." "Penetrating chest trauma, right lower lobe, 90 minutes post-injury with a partially effective seal. He's got air trapping. I want to confirm with a listen before I commit to the needle, but I'm not waiting long." "I'll take the tube." "I'll assist." She glanced at him. "You're fast with a tube?" "I'm adequate," Marsh said, which was the most honest thing she'd heard all night. They moved into the department, and the department reorganized itself around them without being told. The trauma bays were cleared. The tray was there. Respiratory. A tech named Yolanda, who Maya had worked with twice and trusted, was already at the head of the bed adjusting the ventilation equipment. They got Reyes flat. Maya put her stethoscope on his chest and listened for 4 seconds, and then straightened up and said, "Right side decreased," and Marsh was already gloved, already asking for the tray, and the process that followed was the particular controlled violence of emergency thoracic intervention. Not elegant, not the version they show in medical dramas, but effective in the way that a crowbar is effective when you need a door open. Reyes came back in increments. His blood pressure climbed. His oxygen saturation, which had been sitting at 87% and making everyone in the room quietly tense, crossed 90 and kept going. His eyes opened at 94%, and he looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had been very far away and was still not entirely sure he'd come back. Then he turned his head and found her standing beside him. "Okafor," he said. His voice was wrecked. "You're here." "I'm here." "I told them." He stopped, swallowed, the chest tube pulling with the movement. "I told them if anyone could. I said if we could get to you. Don't talk, Reyes. I just..." He closed his eyes for a second. When they opened again, they were wet at the corners, which was not weakness. It was blood loss and relief and 90 minutes of not knowing, and Maya looked at it directly without looking away. I didn't know if you were still doing this. I'm still doing it, she said. Rest now. He rested. It took 47 minutes to stabilize all 7 casualties to the point where Maya could step back and let the department's normal rhythms carry them forward. 2 went to the OR, Reyes and an operator with a femoral injury that the trauma surgeon, Dr. Kowalski, took one look at and declared could not wait. 3 were admitted with injuries serious enough to require monitoring but not immediate surgery. 2 were treated and refused admission, which Maya noted and did not argue about because she had learned which battles could be won with injured operators who had decided they were fine. During those 47 minutes, Dorian Voss had not left the building. She became aware of this gradually, his presence registering at the periphery of her attention the way an irrelevant variable registers when you're focused on the primary problem. He was in the waiting area. He had apparently called someone because there were now 2 additional officers in the department, neither of them medical personnel, both of them watching the restricted activity in the trauma bays with the focus of people who had been told to watch. At 1:28 a.m., when the department had reached something approximating stability, Voss walked up to the nursing station and asked Patricia Humes for Maya's full name, employee ID, and supervisor contact. Patricia looked at him. It's the middle of the night. I'm aware of the time. Then I'll also tell you that I watched you assault a staff member 2 hours ago, Lieutenant, and the only reason I haven't already— I need her name and ID, Voss said. Patricia gave him her name. She did not give him the ID number, which technically she wasn't required to provide on demand, and Voss either didn't know that or decided not to push it. He wrote Maya's name in his notebook. He underlined it once. Maya was at the medication station when he found her. She was reconciling the controlled substance count, which had to be done regardless of what else was happening, because the documentation requirements of a hospital did not pause for emergencies. I want to know who those people are, Voss said. Maya continued counting. I don't know who they are. You knew they were coming. She marked her count and moved to the next column. I received a call that casualties were incoming. That's all I was told. From who? I don't know. Voss put his hand on the edge of the medication cart, not blocking her, not quite, close enough that it was meant to be felt as blocking. You're obstructing an investigation. I'm completing a medication count. She looked up at him then, directly. The look was not hostile. It was patient in a way that was somehow worse than hostility. The patience of someone who has all the time in the world because they're not the one who should be worried. What investigation, Lieutenant? Those men are armed. They came in military vehicles. There's no incident report, no notification to the department. Casualties arriving at an emergency department don't require police notification. She went back to her count. If you have concerns about their legal status, you can contact the hospital administrator. That office opens at 8. Voss stood there. He was breathing through his nose in a particular way that people breathe when they are angry and are trying not to be seen as angry and are failing. What's your background? He said. Where did you work before here? You can find that information through HR. I'm asking you. I know, Maya said, and turned the page of the count sheet and did not say anything else. Voss left the medication station and went back to waiting. He was good at waiting. She'd give him that. He waited with the patient, contained energy of a man who believed that time was always on his side. At 2:15 a.m., the man from the vehicle, the one who'd been crouching beside Reyes, whose name she still hadn't learned, found her in the break room. She was standing at the coffee machine. She had been standing there for approximately 2 minutes without actually making coffee, which was perhaps the most honest measure of how the night had gone. He stopped in the doorway. He was no longer in tactical gear. Someone had found him a set of scrub pants and a gray pullover that fit him approximately, and without the gear he looked like what he was, a man in his late 30s who had been awake for a very long time and had spent significant portions of that time in fear for people he cared about. My name is Carraway, he said. Operative Carraway, Reyes's unit. I figured, Maya said. She pressed the button on the coffee machine. He said you were the best trauma medic he'd ever worked with. Carraway crossed his arms loosely, leaned against the doorframe. He said that sober, in the middle of a debrief, which means he meant it. Reyes has always been generous. He said you turned down 2 promotions to stay in the field. She picked up the cup when it finished. That's not relevant to tonight. Maybe not. Caraway watched her. Who's the cop? The shift was slight, but Caraway caught it. She'd been trained to minimize tells, and he'd been trained to find them. Local police lieutenant, she said. There's some history. He's been watching the trauma bays for 2 hours. I know. You want us to? No. She said it cleanly, without hesitation. He's a problem I handle through appropriate channels. Caraway nodded slowly. The nod had a quality of assessment in it. You sound different in there, he said. Than you sound out here. I know. Which one is the real one? Maya considered the question for a moment, holding the coffee cup with both hands. Both, she said, depending on what's needed. Caraway nodded again. He pushed off the doorframe. For what it's worth, I'm going to make some calls in the morning about the lieutenant. He paused. What he did earlier, people saw. People saw, Maya agreed. I've documented it. That's enough. Is it? She looked at him across the break room. It will be, she said. He left. She drank the coffee. She was back on the floor at 2:40 when Patricia flagged her from the nursing station with an expression Maya had not seen on her in 11 months. Patricia was not an easily rattled person. She had worked a mass casualty incident in 2019, had managed a department through 2 consecutive winter surge crises, had been assaulted by a patient once, and come back the next shift. The expression she had now was something between professional alarm and a more personal uncertainty. There's a man outside, Patricia said, keeping her voice down. Not a patient. He came in about 10 minutes ago and he's been sitting in the waiting area and he's not doing anything wrong exactly, but She stopped. He asked for you by name, not your badge name. He asked for Okafor. Maya looked toward the waiting area. Through the glass partition, she could see the chairs, the overnight patients, the small miseries that waiting rooms collected. The man was in the far left corner, upright in a plastic chair with his hands on his knees, wearing civilian clothes that didn't sit on him naturally. His age was difficult to determine. His eyes, when they moved across the waiting room, moved in the pattern of someone who had never in their life stopped tracking exits. She put her hand on Patricia's arm briefly. I'll handle it. She went through the door to the waiting room and crossed to the far corner and sat down in the chair beside him without being invited, the way she might sit down across a table from someone at a briefing. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. No, the man said. His name was not something she was going to say out loud in a public waiting room. She knew him. She had not seen him in 3 years. I heard about Reyes. He's in the OR. He'll make it. I know he will. The man looked straight ahead. His profile was ordinary, which was the whole point. I also heard about your situation here. The lieutenant. Who told you? People talk. He paused. I made some calls after Caraway checked in, pulled the incident reports you filed. All 8 of them. His jaw tightened slightly. You've been dealing with this for 11 months. It's manageable. He shoved you in front of 40 witnesses, Maya. It was the first time she'd heard her own name used in what felt like hours. She sat with it for a moment. I'm aware. That's not manageable. That's someone who's been enabled long enough that he thinks he can do that. She looked at her hands. The bruise on her forearm had darkened to the color she'd predicted, purple at the center, red-green at the edges. What are you doing here? She said, not confrontationally, as a genuine question. Reyes wanted us to know where you were. He paused. We've wanted to know where you were. She didn't respond to that. You disappeared, he said, and there was something in it that wasn't reproach exactly, but had the shape of it. We knew you left the service. We didn't know. I needed to do this, she said. This work. This kind of it. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not questioning that. Then what are you doing here? The man in the civilian clothes looked at the glass partition, at the nurses moving inside, at the controlled motion of the department that she had been part of for 11 months. Tomorrow morning, he said, some people are going to want to talk to you. On the record. About tonight. About what you did. He turned and looked at her directly for the first time. They're also going to want to talk about your history here, the complaints, the pattern. She met his eyes. And Voss. And Voss. He stood slowly, straightening with the care of a man carrying old injuries. It's going to come out, Maya. What you are. What you were. You know that. She looked at her hands again. I know. Is that okay? She thought about Gerald Soto bleeding into his abdominal cavity while Voss filled out paperwork. She thought about 8 incident reports gathering dust in an administrative system. She thought about Reyes in the OR right now, with a chest tube and a repaired lung, and the specific, unearned luck of having ended up in the right building. Yeah, she said. I think it's okay. He nodded once. He walked toward the exit without hurrying, without looking back, in the manner of someone who had learned that goodbyes were less dangerous when they were brief. Maya sat in the plastic waiting room chair for another minute. Through the glass partition, she could see the nursing station, the monitors, the motion she was part of. She could also see, reflected in the dark window behind the station, Dorian Voss standing at the far end of the corridor. Still there, still watching, and beside him, speaking intently into his phone, the one face she had not expected to see tonight. Dr. Harriet Folger, Chief of Hospital Operations, the person who had received every one of Maya's incident reports, the person who had, officially, passed every one of them on to the appropriate department, the person who was, at 3:04 a.m. on a Friday morning, standing in the corridor of her own hospital in street clothes, having a conversation with the lieutenant she had spent 11 months doing nothing about. Maya looked at them through the reflection for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the nursing station, and asked Patricia for the direct line to the hospital's legal office and the name of the attorney currently on overnight call. At 3 in the morning? Patricia asked. Now, Maya said. Patricia handed her the card without further comment, and as Maya dialed, on the other side of the glass, Folger looked up and found her watching. And whatever passed across Folger's face in that moment was not the expression of someone who had done nothing wrong. The attorney on overnight call was a woman named Sandra Vale, and she picked up on the second ring, which meant either she was already awake or she slept the way people sleep when they know the phone will ring. Maya gave her a compressed version of events in under 3 minutes. The incident reports, the shove, Gerald Soto's near death, the military casualties, and now Folger standing in a hospital corridor at 3 a.m. in street clothes talking to the lieutenant who had been the subject of 8 unaddressed complaints. Sandra Vale was quiet for a moment when Maya finished. You said Dr. Folger is in the building right now. East Corridor. She's been here at least 10 minutes. And she came in after the military casualties arrived. Yes. Another pause. Don't confront either of them tonight. Don't engage with the lieutenant. Don't go near Folger. Document what you saw, timestamp it, and email it to me in the next 20 minutes. I'll be at the hospital at 7. Understood. Ms. Okafor. A brief hesitation. Those incident reports. Did you keep copies outside the hospital system? I kept copies of everything, Maya said. The pause this time had a different quality. Good, Sandra Vale said, and hung up. Maya put the phone down and wrote the time on the back of a supply requisition slip. 3:06 a.m. Folger present in corridor, speaking with Voss, and initialed it and put it in her scrub pocket. Then she went back to work because the department still had patients and the casualties still needed monitoring, and the night was not over because of what she had seen through a window. She did not look at Folger again. She did not need to. At 4:15 a.m., with 3 hours left in her shift, the department settled into the quiet that overnight ERs arrive at eventually. Not peace exactly, but a lower register of urgency. The military casualties were distributed, 2 in the OR, 3 in monitored beds, 2 discharged against medical advice. The regular patients had been triaged and managed. The department smelled like it always smelled at this hour. Antiseptic and recycled air and the particular staleness of a building that had been breathing crisis all night. Voss was still there. It was almost impressive, Maya thought, the stamina of it. He had been in this building for over 6 hours. He had a change to file at 7 a.m. if he wanted to pursue anything formal, and it occurred to her, not for the first time, that his persistence had less to do with investigative purpose and more to do with the fact that he was a man who did not accept the feeling of having lost ground. Tonight had given him that feeling twice, and men like Voss did not go home until they'd recovered something. She was checking the IV line on one of the admitted operators, a young man named Trent, 24, femoral repair done, now sleeping with the specific unconsciousness of someone whose body had simply stopped negotiating, when she heard voices at the nursing station rise above the normal register. Not shouting, close to it. She came out of the room and saw Dr. Folger standing at the nursing station with the posture of institutional authority, speaking to Patricia Humes, and Patricia Humes standing with her arms crossed and her chin up in the way that meant she was not going to move. "I need to review the admissions documentation for the patients brought in tonight," Folger was saying. "All of it." "At 4 in the morning, Patricia said. "I'm the chief of operations. I have full access." "You have access through the administration system, which you can pull from your office during business hours. Patients admitted through our trauma protocol have privacy protections that these patients arrived under unusual circumstances, and I need to assess whether our protocols were followed correctly." "Our protocols were followed perfectly." Patricia's voice was even. "I can say that with confidence because I was here and you weren't." Folger looked past Patricia and found Maya standing in the corridor. Something moved in her expression. Recalibration, Maya thought, the expression of someone adjusting their approach because the person they actually wanted to talk to had appeared. "Ms. Okafor," Folger said, "I'd like a word." Maya walked to the nursing station. She stopped at a distance that was professionally appropriate and did not reduce. "Dr. Folger, can you explain how you came to know these patients were incoming before any notification was received by the hospital?" "I received a call from an unidentified number indicating that casualties were in transit." "An unidentified number?" "That's correct." Folger's eyes moved over her face with the thoroughness of someone who was trying to find a seam. "And you mobilized our trauma team based on an anonymous phone call. I assessed the information as credible and acted accordingly. 7 critically injured patients arrived 22 minutes later." Maya kept her voice level. "If you'd like to critique the clinical decision-making, that conversation should happen in a formal review with department leadership present." "I'm department leadership." "With hospital legal counsel present as well," Maya said. "Given the existing documentation," she paused, "I've been in contact with Sandra Vale. She'll be here at 7. Folger did not move. The mention of the attorney produced a stillness in her that was its own kind of answer. "That's fine," Folger said. Her voice had changed register, still controlled, but with less oxygen in it. "We'll speak then." She left the nursing station, walked past Voss without appearing to acknowledge him, and went through the east corridor doors. Voss watched her go. He watched Maya for a moment after that. Then, finally, at 4:31 a.m., he walked out of the building. Patricia let out a long, slow breath through her nose. "What is happening?" she said. "I'll explain when I can," Maya said. "Can you tell me if I need to be worried?" Maya thought about it honestly. "Not about anything you've done," she said. That was the most accurate thing she could offer, and Patricia, who was a practical woman, accepted it. At 5:50 a.m., Reyes came out of the OR. The surgeon, Dr. Kowalski, who had been operating for over 3 hours, and who had the physical appearance of a man who had won an argument with considerable effort, came to the surgical waiting area where Caraway had been sitting since midnight and told him the repair was complete, the bleeding was controlled, and the patient would be in recovery for the next several hours before he could receive visitors. Maya was walking past when Caraway got the news. She saw his shoulders drop approximately 2 inches, which was the most visible relief she had seen him express all night. She stopped beside him. "He's out?" "He's out." Caraway pressed his fingers against his eyes for a moment. Kowalski said 90 more minutes, and it would have been a different conversation. She did the math backward. 90 minutes was the window. The vehicle reroute, the delay, the 90 minutes Reyes had been on that improvised seal, it had all fit inside the window by a margin that was not comfortable to consider. "He made it," she said. There was nothing more useful to say. Caraway lowered his hands. He looked at her with the direct assessment that was apparently just how he looked at people. "Folger," he said. "The administrator." What's her connection to Voss? Maya considered how much to say. I don't know the details, she said, which was accurate. But I know that 8 formal complaints went nowhere in 11 months, and tonight she was in this building at 3 in the morning in her own clothes talking to him. That's enough of a connection. It's enough, Caraway agreed. He was quiet for a moment. My team is going to be here for at least 2 days. Medical hold minimum. He looked at the floor, then back up. We're going to be visible. People are going to ask questions about who we are and what happened. That's not my concern. It might become relevant, he said carefully, to what comes out about you. She looked at him steadily. I know. And you're comfortable with that? No, she said. But I've been comfortable with worse. He nodded. He sat back down in the chair, elbows on his knees. Maya continued down the corridor. At 6:40 a.m., 20 minutes before her shift ended and 20 minutes before Sandra Vale was due to arrive, everything changed again in the way that things changed in hospitals. Without warning, with no regard for what else was already happening. The call came from Bay 3. A patient named Morris Webb, 61, admitted overnight with a hypertensive crisis, had spiked a new set of vitals that the overnight nurse flagged as concerning. Maya went in and looked at the chart and looked at the patient and looked at the medication hanging on the IV pole, and the sequence of it took her approximately 8 seconds to process. The medication was labetalol. The dose was correct. The rate was correct. But Morris Webb's chart, she scrolled back through the overnight entries, had a documented allergy to labetalol derivative compounds that had been entered at admission and then somehow not flagged when the attending ordered the medication at 2 a.m. Someone had cleared the allergy alert. It had been cleared manually, which required a code and a reason, and the reason entered was patient-confirmed tolerance, which was a falsification because Morris Webb had been barely conscious at 2 a.m. and had not confirmed anything. She turned off the drip. She called for Dr. Marsh. She started the reversal protocol. Morris Webb spent 40 minutes in acute distress before stabilizing. He would be fine. The medication error, which was what it would be officially classified as, at least initially, had been caught early enough that the physiological consequences were manageable. But as Maya stood at the nursing station afterward, writing her documentation with the particular precision of someone who understood that documentation was sometimes the most consequential thing she would do, she went back through the medication record a second time and a third time, and the thing that kept snagging her attention was the access code used to clear the allergy alert. The code belonged to Patricia Humes. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she pulled the building access log. She had admin access to this because she was senior staff, had always had it, had never needed it until now, and cross-referenced the timestamp of the alert clearance with the access records. At 2:07 a.m., when the allergy alert was cleared using Patricia's code, Patricia Humes had been physically present at the nursing station. Maya could see her own documentation from that same window. They had been standing 8 feet apart. Someone had used Patricia's code remotely, or someone had obtained her code and used it from a different terminal. Maya looked at the terminal that had logged the clearance, the workstation in Dr. Folger's administrative office, which Folger had the keys to, which Folger had been in the building to access. She closed the access log. She opened a new email to Sandra Vale, marked urgent, flagged high priority, and began typing with the careful, systematic completeness of someone building a record that would need to hold up later. She included the medication error, the allergy alert clearance, the access code discrepancy, the timestamp, the workstation location. She was still typing when Patricia Humes appeared at her shoulder. I need to show you something, Maya said, before Patricia could speak. She turned the screen. Patricia read it. She read it again. The color left her face in a slow, even recession. That's my code. I know. I know, Maya said again. I cross-referenced your location. You were at the station. Someone used your code from Folger's terminal. She let that land. This is in the email to Sandra Vale. Copies going to the State Nursing Board and Hospital Compliance. I'm sending it in the next 2 minutes. Patricia stood very still. She was a 16-year veteran of this department, and she understood exactly what she was looking at. Not just a medication error, not just a discrepancy, but a pattern of deliberate action that used her credentials as the mechanism. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and controlled in the specific way of someone who is extremely angry and is being careful with it. Send it. Maya sent it. At 7:03 a.m., Sandra Vale arrived at Harlow General in a charcoal blazer with a briefcase and the expression of a woman who had made several phone calls between 3 a.m. and now, and was dissatisfied with what she'd found. She went to the administrator's conference room, which was technically Folger's territory, and set her briefcase on the table and opened it and began laying documents out in the order that would be most useful, which was not chronological order. Maya gave her shift report to the incoming nurse and then, instead of leaving, went to the conference room. Sandra Vale looked up when she entered. I got your email. And I've already been on the phone with the State Medical Board's emergency line and with a contact at the county district attorney's office. She laid another document down. The allergy clearance alone is a felony. Someone used a nurse's credentials to override a patient's safety protocol, and a patient was harmed. She looked at Maya directly. The question is whether we can tie the access to Folger specifically. The workstation log is circumstantial without her physical presence confirmed. Vale picked up a pen. Do you have anything else? Maya thought about what she had. She thought about it the way she thought about clinical problems. Not what she wished she had, but what was actually in front of her. Voss was in contact with Folger before tonight, she said. 8 complaints in 11 months, all shelved. Folger's office received every one. That's a pattern, not proof. I know. Maya sat down. But Caraway's team, the men who came in last night, they have resources I don't, and they're going to be here for 2 days minimum. Vale studied her. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that people with significant institutional reach have reason to ensure that what happened to their personnel in this hospital last night is fully understood, including the environment those personnel were treated in. Vale put her pen down. She leaned back. She looked at Maya with the expression of a woman recalibrating the scale of what she was dealing with. How long were you in the military? Maya looked at her evenly. That's not relevant to the legal strategy. Probably not, Vale said, but it explains the way you talk about documentation. She picked her pen back up. It was 7:22 a.m. when Voss arrived at the hospital for what he clearly intended to be a morning continuation of whatever he had decided last night meant. He came in through the main entrance with 2 officers, bypassed the front desk, and went straight to the administrator's area, which meant he either knew Folger was there or he expected her to be. He found instead Sandra Vale standing in the corridor outside the conference room with a folder under her arm. Lieutenant Voss, she said. He stopped. He looked at the folder, at the blazer, at the specific quality of composure that good attorneys develop as a professional tool. Who are you? Sandra Vale. I represent the interests of Harlow General Staff, including Maya Okafor. She held out a card. He didn't take it. She put it back in her pocket. I'm going to need you to direct any further communication to me. The department's contact with Ms. Okafor is suspended pending review. On whose authority? On the authority of the documented assault that occurred on hospital premises last night, which is currently being reviewed by the county office along with 11 months of related conduct. She paused. Also, your officer, the young one, Peralta, gave a statement last night about what Mr. Soto said before he was brought in, about you knowing. Something moved across Voss's face. It was not guilt, exactly. It was the expression of a man who had done the calculation wrong and was recalculating. I'm going to need you to leave the premises, Vale said, or I'll be calling the county duty officer right now. Voss looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the 2 officers behind him. He looked at the conference room door, which was closed. He left. Maya, standing at the nursing station 30 feet away, watched him go. She watched without expression, the way she had watched him shove her into a cart 8 hours ago, not with heat, but with the steady attention of someone who was recording accurately. It was 7:45 a.m. when Caraway found her by the vending machine, which was where she had ended up after the shift change, not entirely sure why she hadn't left yet. Reyes is awake, Caraway said. He's asking for you. She followed him to the recovery unit. Reyes was in the second bay, propped up slightly, chest tube still in place, but eyes clear and tracking in a way that told her his brain was back. He looked terrible. He also looked alive, which was the only metric that mattered at this particular hour. "You look bad," she told him. "You look tired," he said. "I've been up all night." "Me too." He tried to smile. It pulled at his chest and he let it go. "Caraway told me about the lieutenant and the administrator. It's being handled." "That's not—" I wanted to say something. He stopped, gathered breath with the care of a man managing a chest tube. "You've been here 11 months, alone, dealing with that." He looked at her directly. "Why didn't you reach out?" She didn't answer immediately. "Maya." "Because I left," she said. "I made a choice to leave and do this instead. I didn't want—" She stopped. "It wasn't the kind of problem that gets solved by calling someone." "It is, though." His voice was quiet. "That's exactly the kind of problem that gets solved by calling someone. You of all people." She looked at the window. The morning had arrived while she wasn't paying attention. Gray November light coming through the recovery unit glass. The parking lot outside empty and ordinary. "Get some rest," she said. "Okafor." She looked back. "They're coming," he said. "The rest of the team. When word got out, where you were, what happened, Tolliver is already on a flight. Briggs, Weston, Kasimov." He paused. "They're going to come, and they're going to say things to you that are going to be embarrassing for both of you, and you need to be prepared for that." She looked at him. "How many?" "Last I heard, 14. She stood very still. "Maybe more," Reyes said. "They all have your back. They always did. You just weren't there to see it." She left the recovery unit and walked down the corridor toward the elevator, and she was almost there when the doors at the end of the hall opened and Dr. Harriet Folger walked in flanked by two men Maya did not recognize, not police, not hospital, something else, and stopped when she saw Maya standing in the corridor. They looked at each other across 20 feet of hospital hallway. Folger opened her mouth, and behind Maya, the elevator doors opened, and the voice that came out of them was one she had not heard in 2 years, and it said her name the way it had said her name in 6 different countries across 9 years of service, and it belonged to the one person who could walk into this building and make every calculation Folger and Voss had made collapse overnight. The voice belonged to Colonel Diane Hartwell. She was 54 years old, medium height, gray at the temples in the way that had happened fast and young and that she had never done anything about. She was wearing civilian clothes, dark slacks, a navy jacket, the kind of unremarkable outfit that people who spent years operating in environments where being unremarkable was a survival skill defaulted to without thinking. She had a phone in her left hand and a coffee cup in her right, and she looked at Maya Okafor in the corridor of Harlow General's recovery wing with the expression of a woman who had driven 3 hours through the night and was not surprised to find that things were worse on the ground than they'd sounded on the phone. "Okafor," she said again. Maya looked at her. There was a half-second where something moved across her face. Not surprise, not quite. Recognition, and behind it something older and less easily named. "Colonel." "Don't." Hartwell stepped out of the elevator. "You've been out for 2 years. It's Diane." She said it the way she said most things. Not warmly, but with the precision of someone who understood that warmth and accuracy were different tools, and this was a moment for accuracy. Then she looked past Maya at Folger, who was still standing 20 feet down the corridor with the 2 men who were not police and not hospital, and Hartwell's expression did the very specific thing that the expressions of people who have spent decades in command positions do when they encounter a situation they have already finished evaluating. "Dr. Folger," she said. Folger's chin came up. She was a woman who had run a hospital operation for 11 years, and she had learned the posture of authority the way people learn languages, practically, out of necessity, until it became natural. "You are?" "Diane Hartwell." A pause. "I'm here in a private capacity, to see a friend and to ensure that several matters that came to my attention last night are appropriately documented." She glanced at the 2 men flanking Folger. "These gentlemen are your legal counsel?" "They're colleagues," Folger said. Hartwell held her coffee cup loosely and looked at Folger with the particular neutrality of someone who had already won the room and was waiting for everyone else to notice. Your legal counsel should probably be present for what the next 48 hours look like. That's a personal opinion. Folger looked at Maya. This is a hospital, Hartwell said. Her voice had not changed register. It did not need to. I'm going to go visit a patient, and then I'm going to sit down with your hospital's attorney and with some people from the county office. You're welcome to your own conversations, of course. She turned to Maya. Which room? Maya led her down the corridor. Behind them, she heard Folger say something to the men beside her, low and fast, and then the sound of a phone being dialed. They walked without speaking until they were past the nursing station and into the quieter section of the recovery wing. Then Hartwell said, still walking, "Your arm." Maya glanced at her forearm. The bruise had gone full purple overnight, the shape of the card edge distinct and dark against her skin. She had forgotten about it. It's a bruise. I can see what it is. Hartwell's jaw moved slightly. You filed 8 complaints. I did. And they went nowhere. They went nowhere. Hartwell was quiet for 3 steps. That shouldn't have happened. No, Maya agreed. It shouldn't have. Hartwell stopped walking. She turned and looked at Maya directly, the way she had looked at her in 9 years of difficult rooms in difficult countries, the way that meant she was going to say something that had weight to it, and she wanted it to land correctly. Why didn't you call? Because I left, Maya said. It was the same answer she had given Reyes, and she meant it both times. I made that decision, and I was going to stand in it. Standing in a decision and being stubborn about it aren't the same thing. I know. Do you? Maya looked at the wall for a moment. It was an old wall, institutional beige, the paint slightly scuffed at shoulder height, where generations of gurneys had passed. I'll call next time, she said. It was not a full concession, but it was honest, and Hartwell accepted it the way she accepted most honest things, without ceremony. Reyes was awake when they came in. He saw Hartwell, and something happened in his face that was complicated. Relief and embarrassment, and a soldier's particular discomfort at being seen horizontal by someone whose opinion of his vertical performance mattered. Colonel. At ease, Hartwell said, which was technically absurd given that he was lying in a recovery bed with a chest tube, and Reyes made a sound that was almost a laugh and then stopped because it pulled. She stayed with him for 6 minutes. She asked about the mission in the clipped, non-specific way that people ask about things they'll receive a full briefing on later. She looked at his chart with the focused attention of someone who had read enough field medical documentation to understand what she was reading. She asked if he needed anything. He said he needed someone to tell Sergeant Tolliver that he was fine before Tolliver arrived and made a scene. Tolliver's landing at noon, Hartwell said. I'll call him from the car. Reyes closed his eyes. How many are coming? Enough. Okafor said 14. Okafor got the number from you and you got it from Caraway at 2 a.m. after surgery. Hartwell picked up her coffee. The actual number is more. Maya, standing by the window, did not react to this. At 8:20 a.m., the conference room on the administrative level had 4 people in it. Sandra Vale, Hartwell, a county duty officer named Marcus Feld, who had arrived with 2 assistants and the expression of a man who had received a phone call at 6 a.m. that had significantly restructured his morning, and a hospital board member named Ruth Ackerman, who had driven in from across town and who was, it became apparent within the first 5 minutes, not aligned with Folger on most relevant matters. Maya was not in the conference room. She was in the staff lounge, drinking bad coffee, because Sandra Vale had told her to stay out of the room while the initial framing was established, which was legal strategy and not personal, and Maya understood strategy. Patricia Humes came and sat beside her at 8:35. They had not spoken properly since Maya had shown her the access log at the nursing station. Patricia sat down with her own cup and looked at the table for a moment before speaking. The code, she said. It wasn't you, Maya said. I know it wasn't me. I'm asking how someone got it. You used a workstation in the East Corridor at 1:40 a.m. during the peak of the casualty intake. There were a lot of people moving through that section. Maya looked at her. It's a shoulder surf situation. Someone watched you log in, or got it from the system logs if they had administrator access. She paused. Folger has administrator access. Patricia turned her cup in her hands. I've worked here 16 years, she said. I've worked under 3 administrators. 2 of them they were fine. Not great, but fine. She stopped. I knew there was something off about her relationship with Voss. I knew it, and I filed it away, and I told myself it was none of my business. 8 complaints in 11 months, Maya said. You supported every one of them. Supporting and acting are different. You acted last night, when Voss told you to move me and you didn't move. Maya looked at her. That's on the record, 41 witnesses. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I was terrified, she said, when he shoved you. Yes, for you, but also because I knew what it meant, that he'd actually done it in front of everyone. She shook her head. Men like that don't do things like that when they're worried about consequences. No, Maya said, they don't. Which means he didn't think there were any. He was right for 11 months. Patricia set her cup down. Not anymore. The conference room meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, which Maya knew because she was watching the clock on the staff lounge wall with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting in conditions considerably less comfortable than a hospital lounge with functional heat. At 11:05 a.m., Sandra Vale came out and found her. Okay, Vale said, sitting down across from her. Here's where we are. She laid a legal pad on the table, and Maya could see the volume of notes without being able to read them. The medication error, the allergy override, is being referred to the state medical board and the county DA's office simultaneously. The access log is part of the referral. Folger's administrator credentials are suspended pending investigation, effective 1 hour ago. Ruth Ackerman made that call with board authorization. Folger knows? She's been notified. Vale's pen moved. The complaints, all 8, are being reopened under a joint review with hospital HR, the county duty office, and an independent patient safety auditor. The county is also pulling use of force documentation from Voss's unit for the last 18 months. What Officer Peralta provided last night is part of that record. Maya processed this methodically. Voss? Voss is on administrative leave as of this morning. The department commander pulled him when the county duty officer made the call. Vale looked up. That happened fast, faster than I expected, which suggests there may have been existing concerns about him that this gave someone the leverage to act on. He's been doing this for years, Maya said. I wasn't the first person he targeted in this building. I know. I've spoken to 3 nurses from before your time here. 2 of them left the department. 1 transferred to a different unit and didn't file anything because... Vale stopped. Because they didn't think it would go anywhere. Maya looked at the table. It's going somewhere now, Vale said. At 11:45 a.m., the first car arrived from the airport. Sergeant Marcus Tolliver was 41, wide through the shoulders, with the particular physicality of someone who had spent 2 decades in conditions that either broke people or made them into something that ordinary environments had difficulty containing. He came through the hospital's main entrance and went directly to the recovery wing without stopping at the desk, which suggested either he'd been here before or he had the floor plan already, and Maya, watching from the corridor, thought it was probably both. He saw her before she said anything. He stopped. In the years that she had known Marcus Tolliver, she had watched him remain still in circumstances that would have made most people move. She had watched him make decisions under conditions that removed the option of good choices and required instead the ability to identify the least bad one. She had watched him sit beside critically injured operators and talk them through pain management with the steady, competent care of someone who had crossed the line between soldier and medic so many times the line had blurred. She had never seen him look at her the way he was looking at her now. You've got a bruise on your arm, he said. I know. A cop did that. It's documented. Tolliver looked at her arm for another second. Then he looked at her face. You should have called. Reyes said that. Hartwell said that. Because it's true. I know it's true, she said. I'm working on it. He crossed the distance between them and did the thing he had done exactly once before, at the end of a very long operation in a very bad place. He put his hand briefly on the top of her head, the way someone does when they want to confirm that a person is real and present and intact. And then he dropped it and stepped back and looked at the floor. "The team's coming," he said. "I heard. Some of them are, you know how they get. About you. I'm just telling you so you're prepared." "How many?" she said. 19, as of this morning. Kasimov's flying in from overseas, which—" He stopped. "He's flying in from overseas, Maya. He's not stationed anywhere near here." She did not know what to do with that, so she said nothing. At 12:30 p.m., with the administrative proceedings on the upper floor grinding forward, in the methodical way that institutional accountability ground when it finally started moving, and with Tolliver installed in the recovery wing in the focused, quiet way that protective people install themselves near people they're protecting, the investigation reached its first public turn. The county duty officer, Marcus Feld, held a brief press conference on the hospital steps. Maya did not watch it live. She heard about it from Patricia, who had watched it on her phone at the nursing station. Folger's administrative suspension was public. The medication error investigation was public. The reopening of the 8 complaint files was public. Voss's administrative leave was public. Feld described a pattern of conduct that had created a hostile and unsafe environment for hospital staff and had resulted in documented patient harm, and used the word accountability 4 times, which was not the same as accountability, but was the precursor to it, and sometimes that was how it started. The hospital was not quiet after that. It moved differently. The particular motion of an institution that has had something it tried to keep interior become exterior, all the internal pressures suddenly having somewhere to go. Staff who had been professionally cautious all morning were less cautious by early afternoon. A nurse named Tomoko, who had transferred to a different unit 14 months ago and who Maya had never met, appeared at the nursing station and asked for Patricia and said she had documentation from before Maya's time that was relevant to the complaint review. Patricia took her to Sandra Vale. At 2:15 p.m., Dorian Voss arrived at the hospital for the 3rd time in 14 hours. He did not come in through the main entrance. He came in through the staff entrance on the east side, which required a key card that he should not have still had, but apparently did. And he went directly to the administrative level, which meant he was either going to see Folger or going to retrieve something from a space he still had access to. Raymond Pick, the overnight security guard, who had gone home at 7 a.m. and come back in at noon because he had heard what was happening and apparently decided that being present mattered, spotted him at the staff entrance on the security feed and called it up to the administrative level immediately. Hartwell took the call. She found Voss in the corridor outside Folger's suspended office, which was locked, standing with his hand on the door handle as if willpower might open it. He heard her coming and turned. They looked at each other. Hartwell had the particular advantage of people who have operated for a long time in high-stakes environments. She did not fill silences with noise, and she did not look like she needed anything from the interaction. And both of these things were destabilizing to people who relied on the discomfort of others. "Lieutenant," she said, "I don't know who you are." "I know." She stopped a comfortable distance away. Not confrontational, just present. "You came back. I have property in that office." "I'm sure you do." She glanced at the locked door. "It's been secured pending the investigation. Everything inside is inventoried as of this morning." She looked back at him. "Whatever you came to retrieve, it's already part of the record." Voss stared at her. His jaw worked slightly. "You can't—" "The board authorized it. County duty officer has a copy of the inventory." She tilted her head. "Is there something specific you were worried about?" It was a clean trap, the kind that doesn't look like one because it's too simple. If he said yes, he'd name the thing. If he said no, he had no further basis for being there. Voss understood this approximately 2 seconds after it closed around him, which was fast enough to mean he was not stupid, but not fast enough to mean he could do anything about it. "You need to leave the premises," Hartwell said. "Your administrative leave requires it. If you need to retrieve personal property, that request goes through the county duty office." She reached into her jacket pocket and held out a card, Feld's card, the duty officer's card. "They'll process it within 48 hours. Voss did not take the card. He looked at it. He looked at the locked office door. He looked at Hartwell with the expression of a man doing a calculation that kept coming out wrong. He left. Hartwell stood in the corridor until she heard the staff entrance close. Then she took out her phone and called Raymond Pick and told him to pull Voss's keycard access from the system immediately and flag the unauthorized entry in the security log. At 3:40 p.m., Reyes was moved from recovery to a monitored room, which was progress. The chest tube was still in place, but his vitals had been stable for 8 hours, and Dr. Kowalski, who had the undemonstrative satisfaction of a surgeon whose work had held up, signed off on the transfer. Caraway had been in and out all day. Tolliver had not left. Maya spent the afternoon doing what she technically no longer needed to be doing. She was past the end of her shift, had been since 7 a.m., had not gone home. She did it without announcing it. She checked on Trent in his monitored bed. She checked on the other admitted operators. She spoke to the day nurses about their specific care requirements, which had some nuances that weren't fully captured in the admissions documentation. She updated her own notes. At 4:15 p.m., Sandra Vale came to find her with the expression of someone delivering news that is not bad, but requires careful handling. The investigation into the allergy override, Vale said. The county has preliminary access log analysis back. Maya waited. It confirms Folger's credentials were used at the administrative terminal. It also shows that the same terminal accessed your employment file, your HR documentation, and your original application records on 4 separate occasions over the last 11 months. Vale paused. Someone was researching you, systematically. Maya looked at her. Looking for what? That's the question. Vale's expression was controlled. Your application lists previous employers in general terms. You didn't include your military service in the application. I wasn't required to. You weren't, but someone was looking, repeatedly. Vale looked at her directly. Is there anything in your background that Folger could have used or tried to use in his leverage? Maya thought about it. Not the thinking of someone deciding what to reveal, the thinking of someone genuinely assessing. My service record has classifications attached to it that would require specific clearances to access. She wouldn't have been able to see the substance of it through an HR file. She paused. But the gaps in my employment history are visible if you look. I had 6 months unaccounted for in my civilian record. Gaps. I was deployed. The nature of it wasn't something I could document conventionally. Vale made a note. So she had something she could potentially question. Something that looked like an irregularity to someone who didn't know what they were looking at. Yes. Did Voss ever raise your employment history directly? Try to use it? Maya thought back through 11 months of hallway confrontations and nursing station friction and 8 complaint forms. He mentioned it once, that he didn't know where I came from. She paused. He said he was going to find out. Vale wrote for a moment. I think what happened here is simpler and uglier than a coordinated campaign, she said finally. I think Voss had a complaint problem, and Folger had a liability problem, and they used each other the way people use each other when they're both trying to make something go away. She looked up. And you were the thing they were trying to make go away. Maya sat with that. It doesn't change the outcomes, Vale said, but it explains the shape of it. At 5:30 p.m., 12 hours after her shift had officially ended, the first of the operators who had traveled specifically to be there arrived in the recovery wing in 2s and 3s, having come from a flight that had landed at 1 p.m. and apparently spent the intervening hours navigating hospital administration and being told they needed to wait for visiting hours. They were not good at waiting, as a population. They had eventually just come in. Maya heard them before she saw them. The particular quality of multiple people moving through a corridor with the unconscious noise discipline of people who have spent years learning to be quiet and can't quite turn it off, even in a civilian setting. She came around the corner from Trent's room and stopped. 7 operators in civilian clothes standing in a hospital corridor, the kind of men who were difficult to categorize if you didn't know what you were looking at, some of them carrying things. Paper bags, which she identified after a moment as food, and coffee. And in one case, a potted plant that the man holding it appeared slightly uncertain about. One of them saw her first. He was the one she recognized as Kasimov. She'd worked with him in 3 different countries. She had put a field dressing on his leg in conditions she did not think about during daylight hours anymore. She had argued with him once at volume in 2 languages about evacuation protocol and been right, and he was standing in a hospital corridor in Calverton holding a coffee cup and looking at her with the specific expression of a large and generally undemonstrative man who has been sitting on an international flight for 11 hours because someone told him where she was. "Okafor," he said. "Kasimov," she said. "You look tired." "You look like you flew overnight." "I did." He held out the coffee. "I got this at the airport. It's probably terrible." She took it. She didn't know what to do with her face for a moment, which was unusual. She looked at the coffee, and then at the assembled group, and then at the corridor ceiling, and then back at Kasimov. "You didn't all need to, but—" "We know," said the man with the plant. His name was Briggs, and he was grinning, which was his default expression in most non-firefight situations. "We wanted to." "There's a cop who shoved you," Kasimov said. It was not a question. "It's being handled." "We heard." He looked at her arm. His expression went very still for a moment, the stillness of a controlled person encountering something that tests control. "We also heard about the administrator, the medication thing. That's also being handled." "Sandra Vale seems capable," said a voice from the back of the group, which was Weston, who had apparently done research on the flight. "I looked her up." "She is," Maya said. They stood in the corridor for a moment, the slightly awkward pause of a reunion that has a lot of weight in it, and not an obvious vessel for that weight. The man with the plant looked at it and then at the nearest flat surface, which was a windowsill, and set it down there. "It's a peace lily," he said. "For the room. Hospitals are depressing." Maya looked at the plant. "Reyes is going to make fun of that." "Reyes doesn't get a vote. He has a chest tube." She almost smiled. It was the first time in approximately 15 hours that her face had approached that particular configuration. At 6:45 p.m., Marcus Feld returned to the hospital for a second time. He came with an assistant, and he went directly to Sandra Vale. The meeting was 20 minutes. When it ended, Vale came to the staff lounge where Maya had finally, at Tolliver's insistence, sat down with actual food. "Folger resigned," Vale said. Maya put down her fork. "Effective immediately. She submitted it through the board chair an hour ago. Her attorney issued a statement indicating she was stepping down for personal reasons." Vale sat. "Which means nothing, legally. The investigations proceed regardless. But it removes her from the building and from her access to hospital systems." "Why now, so?" Maya said. "Why tonight?" "Because the county gave her attorney a preview of what the access log analysis was going to show, and her attorney apparently advised her that being in the position when the formal report dropped was not in her interests." Vale looked at her steadily. "The analysis shows 47 accesses of hospital staff files over a 14-month period using administrator credentials. Yours, 12 times. Patricia Humes's, 7 times. 6 other nurses with complaint histories involving Voss." She paused. "It also shows that 3 of the original 8 complaint reports you filed were modified in the system after submission. The modification timestamps correlate to accesses from Folger's terminal." Maya was quiet. "She edited them," Vale said. "She changed the documentation to make the complaints look procedurally irregular. That's why they didn't go anywhere. They'd been altered to look like they were filed incorrectly." The silence in the staff lounge lasted about 5 seconds. "Patricia needs to know that," Maya said. "I'm going to tell her next. And the other 6 nurses." "I know." Maya looked at the food on her tray. She had stopped being hungry somewhere in the last 20 seconds. "What does this mean for Voss?" "It means that the 8 complaints now look the way they were actually filed, not the way they were altered to appear, which means 11 months of documented conduct that was suppressed." Vale's voice was even, but there was something underneath it. "The DA's office is interested, the department command is interested, and the union—" She stopped. His union rep reportedly advised him this afternoon to cooperate fully. He declined. Of course he did. His access credentials to the hospital were revoked at 5 o'clock. His department badge is restricted to desk duty pending the administrative review. Vale picked up her pen. He doesn't have anywhere to be tomorrow except answering questions. At 8:30 p.m., Tolliver found Maya in Reyes's room, sitting in the chair beside the bed, which was where she'd been for the last hour while Reyes slept, and the chest tube drained, and the monitors kept their steady accounting of a body that had come back from the edge of what it could absorb. Tolliver knocked on the doorframe even though the door was open. He came in and sat in the other chair and looked at Reyes for a moment, and then at Maya. "You need to go home," he said. "I know." "You've been here for over 24 hours. I know." "Reyes is fine. We're here. The legal situation is moving," she said. "I know." She looked at her hands. The bruise on her forearm had gone the full dark purple of the third day. "I want to be here when Voss makes his statement, whatever he says." "That's not until tomorrow." "I know." Tolliver looked at her with the patience of a man who had spent years around people who were not going to move until they were ready to move. "Why?" he said. She thought about how to say it accurately. "Because he spent 11 months deciding I was someone who could be pushed aside. And I want him to understand. I want him to see clearly exactly what he pushed aside." She paused. "Not for me. For the next person he would have done it to." Tolliver was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Then I'll be here too." He got up and went to find another chair. And Maya looked at the monitor above Reyes's bed, and the numbers were steady and good. And outside the window of Harlow General, the city of Calverton was doing what cities do in the evening, settling, shifting, carrying its ordinary weight through the dark. And somewhere in it, Dorian Voss was sitting with the shape of what was coming, and the thing she felt was not satisfaction, not yet, but the particular stillness that comes just before an accounting that has been a long time owed. At 10:17 p.m., her phone buzzed. The message was from a number she didn't recognize. 7 words. "I know what you were. This isn't over." She looked at it for a long moment. Then she forwarded it to Sandra Vale with a timestamp in the note. "New contact, unidentified number, possible Voss." She put the phone in her pocket. She looked at Reyes sleeping. She looked at the monitor. Then she looked at the message again and noticed what she had not noticed in the first pass. The contact metadata beneath the number. The ghost of a location tag that the sender had not known was visible. The cell tower registration that placed the message origin not from across town, not from wherever Voss was sitting tonight, but from inside the building. Someone was still inside Harlow General. She forwarded the message to Tolliver before she stood up. He read it in the chair across the room. She watched his face go through the same sequence hers had. Reading, processing, the location metadata, understanding. He was on his feet in under 4 seconds. "How old is the timestamp?" he said. 3 minutes. He was already at the door. "Stay with Reyes." "Tolliver?" "Maya." He looked back at her. The look was not a request. "Stay with Reyes." She stayed. She sat back in the chair and looked at the monitor and listened to the sounds of the recovery wing, the low ambient hum of equipment, the distant movement of night staff, and underneath it the new awareness of every footstep in the corridor being heard differently now. She texted Raymond Pick directly. "Someone in the building. Check east entrance access log. Now." Then she texted Sandra Vale the location metadata with a note that she'd already sent to Tolliver. Reyes stirred. His eyes opened part way, the unfocused look of someone surfacing from a medicated sleep. "Hey," he said. "Hey. What time is it?" "Late." He looked at her face. Even half-conscious and on post-surgical pain management, Reyes had the field-trained habit of reading a room through whoever was in it. "Something's happening." "It's handled." "You look like something's happening." "Go back to sleep, Reyes." He looked at the door, then back at her. He did not go back to sleep. He lay there with his eyes open and said nothing, which was his version of compliance, and she appreciated it. 11 minutes later, Tolliver called her. "It's not Voss," he said. She had not been expecting that. "Who?" "Aldrich Marsh." She processed the name. Elliot Marsh's brother. She knew there was a brother, had heard Elliot mention him once in the context of a family obligation he'd missed a shift for, had not retained more detail than that. "What's his connection?" "He works in hospital IT, has since last year." Tolliver's voice was flat and controlled. "Caraway found him in the server room on the 2nd floor. He had a laptop running and it looks like he was pulling files. Patient records, administrative logs, the investigation documentation. The allergy override, Maya said. We think he ran it. From the server room. He had Folger's credentials on a USB drive. A pause. He's not a hardened guy, Maya. He's 28. He's sitting on the floor of the server room right now, and he looks like he's going to be sick. Who told him to do it? He says Folger. He says she came to him 3 weeks ago and told him it was a patient safety audit, that she needed him to review certain records and clear certain flags. Tolliver paused. He says he didn't know what the medication override would do, that he thought he was just clearing a system error. Maya looked at Reyes. She looked at the monitor. She thought about Morris Webb, 61, in acute distress for 40 minutes this morning, his body fighting a medication his chart had clearly said he couldn't have. She thought about a 28-year-old IT employee sitting on a server room floor thinking he was running an audit. He sent the message, she said. He says Folger told him to, that she texted him the words and told him to send them from an unregistered number. Another pause. I don't think he knew about the metadata. I don't think he knew much about any of it. Is Pick with you? Pick called the county duty officer 10 minutes ago. Feld is on his way. She hung up. She sat in the chair. She looked at her hands for a long moment, and then she looked at Reyes, who was looking back at her with the steady attention of someone who had been awake this whole time. Folger, she said. Not explaining, just saying it. Reyes closed his eyes. She had someone inside. Her own damage control. Someone she could point at if the access logs came back. Maya set her phone on the arm of the chair. A 28-year-old who thought he was doing an audit. Is he in trouble? That's for the county to determine. She leaned back. Probably, but less than her. Feld arrived at 10:51 p.m. He was there for 40 minutes. When he left, Aldrich Marsh left with him. Not in handcuffs, but in the particular accompaniment of people who are going to sit in a room and answer questions for a significant period of time. Raymond Pick walked them out and came back and filed his own incident report with the specificity of a man who had decided that documentation was going to be his contribution to whatever this was. Hartwell came to Reyes' room at 11:30. She stood in the doorway, looked at the situation. Reyes awake, Maya in the chair, Tolliver leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and said, "The IT employee is cooperating. Folger's attorney has been contacted by the county regarding the additional charge of directing a subordinate to falsify safety records." Which is, Tolliver said, more serious than the access violation alone. Hartwell stepped in. She looked tired. Not broken down tired. The tired of someone who has spent 20 hours being competent and is ready to stop. Her resignation this afternoon is going to look different in context now. It's going to look like she knew this was coming. Because she did, Maya said. Because she did. Hartwell looked at her. You're still here. I know. You need to go home, Maya. Everyone keeps telling me that. Everyone is right. Hartwell sat in the remaining chair, which meant the chair arrangement in Reyes's recovery room now had the quality of a very tired, small meeting. Voss gives his statement tomorrow at 10. Feld has the complaint files, the original unmodified versions, and the access log. He has Peralta's statement from last night. He has the footage from the ER. The hospital cameras caught the incident. She paused. He has enough. For what outcome? Maya said. Termination, at minimum. The assault charge is being pursued separately by the county. Hartwell looked at her steadily. It's not going to be clean. It's going to be a process, and it's going to take months, and at some point you'll have to give a formal statement and possibly testify. She paused. But it's moving. It's all moving. Maya looked at the window. The city outside was dark and quiet. Folger managed those complaints for 11 months, she said. 8 of them. She modified the documentation. She kept Voss operational in that building. She turned back. What happens to the patients from those 11 months, the ones who were treated while he was doing what he was doing, who didn't have anyone file a complaint? Hartwell was quiet. The patient safety audit goes backward, Vale said from the doorway. She had arrived sometime in the last minute, which Maya had not registered. That's part of what I requested from the board today. A retrospective review of every incident involving Voss's unit in the last 3 years. Every patient interaction, every treatment, every outcome. 3 years, Maya said. Possibly further. Vale came in and stood with her briefcase in front of her. Ruth Ackerman has the board's authorization. It starts Monday. The room was quiet for a moment. Reyes spoke from the bed. She's not going to say thank you, he told the room generally. Just so everyone knows. She doesn't do that. You did something for her, you'll know because she shows up and does something back. That's how she works. Reyes, Maya said. I'm just managing expectations. You have a chest tube. I'm aware. He looked at the ceiling. I'm just saying, whatever you're all waiting for her to say, she's not going to say it. Hartwell looked at Maya. Something moved in her expression that was not quite a smile, but had the shape of one. Get some sleep, she said. Come back at 9. You should be there when he gives his statement. Maya went home. It was the first time she had been in her apartment in 36 hours, and it had the particular quality of a space that has been waiting without knowing it was waiting. Everything exactly where she'd left it. The small geography of a life she had been building quietly and alone for 11 months. A kitchen that faced east. A bookshelf that she had been filling slowly. A coffee maker that she had cleaned on Wednesday night before the Thursday shift that had not ended until now. She showered. She slept for 6 hours, which was not enough, but was what her body would accept. She was back at Harlow General at 8:45 a.m. The statement happened at 10 a.m. in a conference room at the county administrative building, not at the hospital, but Sandra Vale was present and Marcus Feld was present, and a representative from the department's internal affairs division was present. And what Dorian Voss said in that room, or more accurately, what he declined to say, the silences and the redirections and the eventual clipped admissions that his attorney finally advised him to make, was documented with the thoroughness that Feld had been building toward since his 6 a.m. phone call the previous morning. Maya was not in the room. She was not entitled to be in the room. She sat in the county building's waiting area on a plastic chair that was no more comfortable than the hospital's, and she waited with the patience of someone who had learned that the hardest part of any operation is the part where you have done your work and you have to trust the process to carry it the rest of the way. Tolliver sat beside her. He brought coffee. It was better than the vending machine coffee from the night before, which was not a high bar. At 11:35 a.m., Vale came out. She looked the way good attorneys look after something goes the way it was supposed to. Not triumphant, because triumph was a liability in her profession, but with the contained precision of someone whose model of the situation had been confirmed. He admitted to the shove, she said. She sat down across from them. He admitted he knew Soto had reported abdominal pain before transport. He admitted he had concerns about your complaints and had spoken to Folger about them on multiple occasions. She set her briefcase on her knees. He said, and this is the part that matters, that Folger told him the complaints were being reviewed and that he should continue his normal operations. She told him he was covered, Tolliver said. She told him the complaints were procedurally irregular and would be dismissed. Vale looked at Maya. He believed her. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. It doesn't change what he did, Maya said. No, it doesn't. Vale opened her briefcase. The Internal Affairs Division is recommending termination and decertification. The county is pursuing the assault charge. The Soto incident is being reviewed separately under patient endangerment statutes. She paused. He's known in this city for 20 years. This is going to be visible. Good, Maya said. Vale looked at her. The board wants to meet with you this afternoon. Ruth Ackerman and 2 other members. Hospital administration in transition, formally speaking. She handed over a card with a time written on the back. 3 o'clock. Maya looked at the card. What does the meeting look like? It looks like a hospital that needs to rebuild its relationship with its clinical staff and thinks you might have something useful to say about how to do that. Vale paused. And it looks like a recognition that what happened in that ER 3 nights ago, what you caught, what you did with those casualties, has not gone unnoticed. The board meeting was in the administrator's conference room, the same room where Sandra Vale had laid out her documents at 7 a.m. 2 days ago. The 3 board members were present when Maya arrived. Ruth Ackerman, A silver-haired woman with the direct manner of someone who had been in boardrooms long enough to have stopped performing patients. A man named Dr. Herbert Tao, who ran hospital operations for 2 other facilities in the county and had the look of someone doing rapid comparative assessment, and a woman named Jess Portillo, who introduced herself as the patient safety advocate for the board. They asked her questions for 40 minutes. They asked about the complaint process, about what had happened with each of the 8 reports, about what she would have needed in order to feel that the system was functioning. They asked about the night of the casualties, not the classified operational details, which they understood she couldn't provide, but the clinical decisions, the mobilization, what she had needed and what hadn't been there. They asked, near the end, what she thought the department needed. She thought about it honestly. She didn't give them the answer that sounded good. She gave them the one that was accurate. A clinical complaint pathway that bypasses administrative review, she said. When complaints involve patient harm, they need to go to an independent body immediately, not through a chain that any one person can manage. She paused. And a trauma response protocol that doesn't require a nurse to fight for 3 weeks to get a patient's pain complaint taken seriously. Gerald Soto almost died in a waiting room. The medicine was right. The system around the medicine was broken. Ackerman wrote something. Tao asked a follow-up question. Portillo asked 2 more. At the end, Ackerman looked at her directly. "We're in a period of transition," she said. "Formal transition. Folger's position, the administrative restructure that's coming. We're going to need people who understand what went wrong and why." She paused. "We'd like to offer you the interim lead of clinical safety review. It's not a departure from nursing. It's additive. You'd maintain your ER role and take on the protocol review oversight." Maya looked at her. "Interim. To start." Ackerman did not look away. "We want to see what you do with it." Maya thought about Patricia Humes, who had supported 8 complaint reports and spent 11 months watching them go nowhere. She thought about Tomoko, who had transferred to a different unit. She thought about 3 years of patient interactions that were going into retroactive review starting Monday. She thought about Morris Webb and 40 minutes of acute distress that had happened because someone had decided that removing her was worth a felony. "Yes," she said. "I'll take it." The formal public acknowledgement happened 4 days later, which was not a ceremony anyone planned but became one anyway. It started with Reyes. He was 7 days post-surgery, chest tube out, sitting up in his hospital bed with the color of someone whose body had decided to cooperate, when Tolliver arrived with 9 of the team members who were still in Calverton on medical hold or by choice. They came into the room in the way that a group of large, disciplined people comes into a small room, carefully, with awareness of the space, redistributing themselves against walls and into corners. Reyes looked at them. He looked at the doorway. Maya was in the doorway. "Come in," Reyes said. She came in. What happened next was not scripted. There was no protocol for it. Tolliver had not organized it. He would say later that he'd mentioned it to 2 people and it had simply spread the way things spread among people who share a common understanding of what something means. Kasimov went first. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and took out a coin. Worn, heavy, the kind of challenge coin that carries more history than it appears to, and held it out to her. She took it. She looked at it. It had the weight of a decade in it, and she knew it, and she didn't say anything. Briggs went next, then Weston, then 5 more, one at a time, each one crossing the small distance of the hospital room and placing a coin in her hand or on the bedside table, or in one case, simply pressing it into her palm and holding her hand closed around it for a second without speaking, which was the most he had ever communicated without words in the entire time she had known him. Tolliver was last. He didn't have a coin. He had never gone in for the coins, as a ritual. It wasn't his way. He came across the room and he looked at her and he said, "You kept every one of them alive. Every single one. And I know you know that. I'm saying it out loud anyway." She looked at the coins in her hand. She looked at Reyes in the bed, who was watching her with the expression of a man who had told her she was bad at thank yous, and was watching her prove him right and not minding it at all. She looked at the window, the gray November light, the ordinary city outside. "I know," she said, and then, "Thank you." Reyes made a sound of triumph that pulled at his healing chest, and he didn't care. The formal department acknowledgement came from Ruth Ackerman at a staff meeting the following week. She stood at the front of the conference room with the full nursing staff and the attending physicians and the administrative personnel, and she said clearly, with the specificity that vague acknowledgments do not have, that Maya Okafor had filed 8 patient safety complaints over 11 months, that every one of those complaints had been valid, that they had been suppressed through administrative misconduct, and that the patients who had been served by this department in the interim deserved to know that there were staff members who had never stopped trying to protect them. She said it in front of everyone. Patricia Humes was in the back of the room. Maya was aware of her without looking. She was aware of Dr. Marsh in the second row, of Yolanda, the respiratory tech by the door, of Raymond Pick standing to the side because he wasn't technically administrative staff, but no one had suggested he leave. Ackerman said one more thing before she closed. The woman who flagged a splenic laceration that would have killed a man in a holding cell, who mobilized this department in the middle of the night for 7 critically injured people, who spent 11 months filing paperwork that kept disappearing and filed the next one anyway, she was never in any of that acting above her role. Ackerman paused. She was acting exactly within it. The problem was never her. The problem was a system that decided someone who did her job correctly was the thing that needed to be managed. The room was quiet. Maya did not speak. She had not been asked to speak, and she would not have asked for the opportunity. She sat in the second row with her hands in her lap, and she listened to her own 11 months described accurately, in public, by someone with the authority to make the description matter. It was enough. Dorian Voss was formally terminated from the Calverton Police Department 6 weeks later. The decertification process, the one that would prevent him from serving as a law enforcement officer in the state, was filed concurrently. The assault charge resulted in a plea agreement that carried a suspended sentence, mandatory counseling, and a public record that would follow him. His name was on the retroactive patient review as a contributing factor in 14 documented cases over 3 years where clinical care had been compromised or delayed. 14 cases. 4 of them had involved injuries more serious than they should have been because of delays he had created or demanded. One of them had been Gerald Soto, who had survived a grade 2 splenic laceration by a margin that Maya still did not think about comfortably. She thought about it once, in the middle of a night shift 3 weeks after everything had settled into its new shape. She was at the nursing station at 3 a.m., doing the same work she had done every shift for 11 months. Documentation, medication counts, the steady maintenance of a department's accountability to the people inside it. And she thought, 14, not as an abstraction, as 14 specific people who had come into a building asking for help and gotten something that was compromised before it reached them. She wrote it in her notebook, not the names, which she didn't have access to, but the number, a reminder of what the work was for. Harriet Folger was charged with evidence tampering, abuse of administrative access, and directing a subordinate to falsify safety records. The case was pending as of the last week Maya tracked it closely. Her attorney was negotiating. These things took time. Maya had learned, in 11 months of watching complaint reports go nowhere, and then in the weeks of watching them start moving, that accountability was rarely a single moment. It was a direction. It was the difference between a system that absorbed misconduct and one that, when pushed far enough and in the right places, finally had to account for it. Aldrich Marsh, Elliot's brother, 28 IT employee, the man in the server room, cooperated fully and received a conditional outcome that required community service and a professional probation. It was not a clean resolution. He had done something with consequences he hadn't fully understood, and the consequences of that were still consequences. Elliot Marsh never spoke directly to Maya about it. He came to her once, 3 weeks in, and stood in the medication room doorway and said, "I don't know what to say." She had told him, "You don't need to say anything." He had nodded and left, and they had continued working together with the professional competence of 2 people who understood that some things don't resolve, they just become part of the landscape you navigate. Daniel Reyes was discharged on day 11. He came to find her before he left, which she had told him was unnecessary and he had done anyway. He was wearing street clothes for the first time since she'd met him at the ambulance bay, and he looked like what he was, a man who had walked back from a significant injury and was going to carry the memory of it in the way the body carries things, not always visibly, but permanently. "You good?" he asked. "I'm good," she said. You? Getting there. He looked at the department around them, the nursing station, the bays, the motion of it. This is a good place, he said. Now that... He stopped. Now that it works better, she said. Yeah. He looked at her. You going to stay? She thought about it. The honest version, not the reflexive one. She thought about the interim clinical safety review, which was no longer interim as of the board's most recent meeting. Ruth Ackerman had made the position permanent 2 weeks ago, with a formality and a salary adjustment and a title that meant something. She thought about the new complaint pathway, which was hers to build. She thought about the 14 cases and the number in her notebook and the direction that accountability moved when it moved. Yeah, she said, I'm staying. He nodded. He held out his hand and she shook it, and then he did the thing he had done when he first saw her in the ambulance bay. He looked at her with the recognition of someone who knows exactly what they owe and is not pretending otherwise. Thank you, he said, for the first time and for this time. She held on to the handshake for 1 second. Take care of the chest, she said. Respiratory physio every day. I mean it. I know you mean it. Reyes. I'll do the physio, he said. I promise. He left. She stood at the nursing station and watched him go, and then she turned back to her work. Here is the thing that nobody tells you about being underestimated. It is not, at bottom, about the person doing the underestimating. It feels that way. When Dorian Voss put his hand on Maya Okafor's shoulder and shoved her into a supply cart in front of 40 people, it felt very specifically about her. Her gender, her rank, her 11 months of being the woman who kept filing reports that kept disappearing. It felt personal because the dismissal was personal. The contempt was personal. But the contempt was not the point. The point, the thing that mattered, that had always mattered, was what she did with her hands in the 4 hours that followed. Gerald Soto's life, 7 casualties in an ambulance bay. A medication error caught at 6:40 a.m. by a nurse who had been awake for 23 hours and was still paying attention. These were not statements. These were not responses to Voss. They were simply the work, continuous and without performance, which is what the work looks like when the person doing it is doing it for the right reasons. The right reasons don't protect you from systems that have decided you're inconvenient. They don't protect you from men with badges and women with administrator access who have decided that the complaints you file are a problem to be managed. They don't protect you from being shoved into a cart or having your reports modified or spending 11 months watching institutional indifference absorb your documentation and continue functioning as if nothing has been filed. What they do is this. They give you something to stand on when the floor underneath you has been deliberately removed. They give you the habit of accuracy when accuracy is the only thing that will save someone's life at 6:40 in the morning. They give you, in the end, a record, not of who you told people you were, but of what you actually did, which is the only record that holds up. Maya Okafor understood this not as philosophy, but as practice. She had learned it in 8,000 feet of altitude in a burning medical station, and she had carried it into a hospital in Calverton, and she had continued practicing it even when no one was counting. The counting, it turned out, had been happening anyway. It just took a night of 7 casualties and a lieutenant who shoved the wrong woman to make it visible. She was 32 years old. She had a bruise on her forearm that was fading to yellow at the edges, the way bruises do when the body is repairing itself. She had a notebook with 14 in it and a complaint pathway to build and a department that was, slowly and imperfectly and with the institutional friction of a system that doesn't change easily, becoming something that worked better than it had before. She put on her stethoscope. She went back to work.